All right, today we're going to work on section 4.2, talking about exponents. Something I wanted to add as a little bit review. When we have multiplication, it is just repeated addition. So what I mean by that is that 4 times 2 is really just 4 plus 4. Two groups of 4 when we add. And division is repeated subtraction. So if I have what is 6 divided by 3, I'm going to do 6 minus 3 minus 3. So I had 2 3's that I subtracted, so it would be 2. Okay, so it's basically just repeated addition and repeated subtraction. So something new that we're adding right now is that the exponents, when we have exponents, it's repeated multiplication. So if I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, it's really, there's 4 2's, so I would say 2, I keep my base number, to the 4th power, because there are 4 of them. Okay, so that's just something new that we're doing for this section. So a first example that we're going to do, it says write in exponential form, 2 times 2 times 2 is kind of like what I just did for the last one, times 2 times 2 times 2. So all we have to do is we keep our base number 2, then we count. How many 2's are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 2's, so let me write a little 5 above it, which means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 5 2's, and we're multiplying them together. Okay, so let's try another one. Let's try 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So again, we just keep, I should make sure that doesn't look like it's 2 times. Okay, so I have 3 is my number. How many 3's do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one will be 3 to the 4th power. Okay, I'm going to try to fit one more in here because I don't want to skip a page here. So for number 3, it is parenthesis negative 5, parenthesis negative 5, parenthesis negative 5. Okay, so we know that when we have parentheses next to each other, that means multiplying. I have my base number, which is parenthesis negative 5, parenthesis. Then I say, how many do I have? 3. Okay, so negative 5 to the 3rd power. So again, these are called our base numbers, our bases, base, base, base. So we need to keep that base as 3. We look right here. Here's our base. We have to keep that same number that is repeated. Okay, now I just kind of gave you a hint. So we call these powers. Exponents and powers. Oh, sorry, not powers, just power. And just an example, what we call it, if I have x to the n power, again, there's that power word. The n is my exponent. And the x is the base. So how I would say this is x to the n power. Okay, so this would be some instructions that you would see in your textbook. Write as a power. Okay, so an example would be something like this. First one is negative 5 times x times x times x times y times y. Now remember, we cannot combine any terms that are not the same. So I cannot combine an x with a y because they are not the same. So I see my negative 5, I'm going to bring that out first. Okay, so I can cross that off. Now I have to count how many x's I have. I have 1, 2, 3 x's. Okay, so I have x. My base is x. How many were there? 3. Then how many y's? I have 1, 2 y's. So then I'm going to write, y. Oh, shoot. I'm going to write y to the 2nd power. Now I hope you noticed I didn't write it as negative 5 times x cubed times y squared. Just like I don't want you to do 3 times x. I want you to write it as 3x. So that goes the same for writing your answers when we're doing exponents in this chapter. You don't need to write the times sign, because when we have a 5 and an x right next to each other, I know I need to multiply them because they are right next to each other. So you can just drop the multiplication signs. Really, are we multiplying them? Yes, we are multiplying them. But we just know when there's a number by a letter, we know we're going to multiply them. All right, let's try another one. Let's do this one in yellow. All right. So this one is -3, -3, x times x times x times x times, z. Let me make that a little bit fancier there for you. Times z. Okay, so I have to see. I have two -3's. So your first instinct is going to be to do -3 squared. But in this case, we can solve it. We know that -3 times a -3, remember, two negatives make a positive when we're multiplying. That's a multiplication sign there. Okay, when I multiply two negatives together, they make a positive. So then I just have to do what is 3 times 3? Well, that's 9. Okay, so that is where, don't do this. We just multiply them together because we can do that. Then I look at my x's. X times x times x times x. So I'm going to write my base x. And then there are 4 of them, so I write it to the 4th power. Remember, I don't need to put that multiplying sign between the 9 and the x, because I know when they're next to each other, I'm multiplying them. And then I have 1z, so I just put that z in there, and we're good to go. Here's my answer. Okay, the next thing we're going to try is, the directions will say evaluate. And what it means to do is it means to solve. So you're going to get it down to the simplest form and solve it. So the first one we're going to try is 6 squared, or 6 to the 2nd power. So what I do to solve that is I need to do 6 times 6. I need my base, 6, and I need 2 of them. So I know that 6 times 6 is 36. Okay, for number 2, here's my answer is 36. For number 2, it says -3 squared, or -3 to the 2nd power. So that just means -3 times -3. Remember, when I multiply two negatives, it makes a positive, because the opposite of a negative is a positive. So really what I'm doing is 3 times 3, and I know that that is 9. So that answer is 9. For number 3, I have to do 2 to the 4th power. That means I need my base, 2, and I need 4 of them. Something that helps me when I do this is I do 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. So I need to do 4 times 4 to get my answer, which I know 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, now we're going to get a little trickier. Those are kind of just the basic ones. Now we're going to get one that looks like this. 2 times 5 squared plus 4 times a -3 cubed. So for this one, I really should have done it on the other page, but I'm just going to move this up so we can have more room. I'm going to remind you, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Do not forget the order of operations when solving this. I'll say it again. Do not forget the order of operations when solving. Now we are going to add this other factor in there, the exponents. So we really need to make sure we're doing everything in the right order. Okay, so parentheses. There really aren't any parentheses. They just have the parentheses around the -3 so you don't think it's a subtracting sign. And we can't do anything with just a -3. So we're going to go to our next step, which is exponents. Okay, so I'm just going to start from the left. 5 squared is 5 times 5. And 5 times 5 is 25. Then I'm going to bring everything down. Times 2 plus 4, sorry, times negative 3 cubed, or negative 3 to the third power. I see I still have another exponent. So this is negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. Okay, I know negative times a negative is a positive, so negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9. Then I have to do positive 9 times a negative 3. Okay, so a positive, whenever they're opposite signs, my answer is going to be negative. Then I just have to say what's 9 times 3? That'd be 27. So 27, negative 3 cubed is negative 27. Now I'm going to bring everything down. Times 4 plus 25 times 2. Okay, so I've got parentheses done. I got exponents done. So now I need to do multiplication from left to right. Okay, so 2 times 25 is 50. Plus 4 times negative 27. Move it up a little bit. Okay, so again I need to do my multiplying. Positive 4 times a negative 27. So if I have a positive times negative, I know my answer is going to be negative. So let's do 4 times 27. 4 times 7 is 28. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 more is 10. So my answer is a negative 108 plus 50. Okay, now we're back to that chapter 1 where we had a really hard time figuring out if I'm adding a negative, if I'm subtracting. We had a hard time figuring all this stuff out. So I'm hoping that all that practice that we had will really make this last step easy. Okay, so when I think of 50, I have $50 in my account because it's a positive number. That means I have a $50, or maybe I have a $50 bill in my hand. But the problem is that I owe, who do I owe? I owe Mrs. Druicke $108. Okay, do I have enough money to pay her? I don't, so I know my answer is going to be a negative number. Okay, so if I have $50, I can at least give her 50, right? So let's do what is 108 minus 50. Okay, 8 minus 0 is 8. 0 minus 5, we can't do it. Better cross that out, make it a 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. So I still owe, this negative sign right here means owe. I still owe, oh, come on. I still owe Mrs. Druicke $58 after I paid her up. The 50 that I had. So my answer is negative 58. Again, pay very close attention that you're following. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Pay very close attention that you write down every step along the way. I know I'm going to have to say this again, but it would make me so happy if you just listened to me the first time. Do it step by step, because if you make one little mistake and think that 5 times 5 is 10, your whole answer is off, you guys. So you just have to be so very careful when you're doing these step by step. I would write down 5 times 5. I would write down this 3 times 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is 9 times 3. I'd write down all those steps so that your brain can keep them straight, because if you try to skip steps, we're going to be in big trouble. All right, let's do a couple more practices here. Okay, for number 5, this is the last one we're going to do like this. It says 3 parenthesis 1 plus 4 parenthesis 3. Okay, so again, please excuse my dear from left to right, Aunt Sally from left to right. Okay, so starting with my parentheses, what's inside of my parentheses? I ask myself, is there an operation sign? In this one, I do see there's a plus. So all I have to do is add 1 plus 4, and I get 5. So now my equation says 3 times 5 to the third power. Okay, so I got my parentheses awake, basically. There's nothing else I can do inside of them because I already did that operation of plus. So I can cross off parentheses. Now what about my exponents? I have to do what is 5 times 5 times 5. Okay, 5 times 5 is 25. Then I bring down my times 5. 25 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 more is 12. So 125 times 3. Okay, so let's figure that out. 125 times 3, get 15, 6, 7, 375 would be my answer. Because I don't have anything left, I know that's my answer, 375. All right, now we're going to go on to something new called substitution. And substitution, we have done this before. I-T-U-T-I-O-N. Okay, so an example of this one would be 7 times the quantity of W plus 3 cubed plus Z. I better put a line so I know it's a Z and not a 2. Okay, 4 W equals negative 5 and Z equals 6. So all we have to do is we have to take those letters and exchange them for the number that they're meant to be. So if I rewrite my original equation, I would get 7 times the quantity of negative 5 plus 3 cubed plus, and then instead of a Z, I'm going to write a 6. Okay, so all I did is I took this negative 5 and I plugged it in for the W, and this negative 6, and I plugged it in for Z. All I'm doing is changing the letters for the right numbers that are on there. Okay, now I need to solve. Again, I'm going to start with my parentheses because we start with our P. So negative 5 plus 3 is a negative 2 cubed. Bring everything down, you guys. This is where you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I remember from being in high school that I would just go too fast and then I'd make silly mistakes and like not bringing down my plus 6. So then my answer would be 6 off. Okay, so you have to really pay attention that each step along the way you're following what you're doing. Okay, so now I'm going to do my exponents. Negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Okay, negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4 because a negative times a negative is a positive. Then I need to multiply that by negative 2. 4 times 2 is 8. I have a positive times a negative, so my answer will be negative 8. Then I bring down plus 6. I bring down negative 8 times 7. And now I can do my multiplying from left to right, which there's only one multiplying. 7 times 8 is negative 56 plus 6. Okay, so again, this is where it gets so tricky, you guys. You have to look at that negative 56 and think of, okay, I owe them $56. But wait a minute, I only have I only have 6. I owe 56, but I only have 6. So how am I going to figure out how much I still owe them if I give them the 6? I still owe $50. Okay, if they're opposite sides, we subtract them, so I could do 56 minus 6, and I would get 0, 50, but I still owe them that money. Okay, so my answer is negative 50. Let's try a couple more. All right, number 2 says 3a squared plus 6 for, yikes, 4a equals negative 5. So now how I'm going to write that? 3 times, because when I have a letter next to a number, I know I'm multiplying them. 3 times negative 5 squared plus 6. Okay, so start with my parentheses. I see I have parentheses, but there's nothing I can do on the inside of them. A negative 5 is a negative 5. I'm not multiplying, I'm not adding, subtracting, dividing. So now I'm going to move on to my next one, which is exponents. Okay, so I have to do negative 5 times negative 5, which is positive 25 plus 6 times 3. Okay, now let's multiply. 3 times 25 is 75 plus 6. 75 plus 6 is 81. So there's my answer, 81. Okay, this is the last one we're going to do together. 3 says negative 2x cubed plus 4y, 4, x equals negative 2, and y equals 3. Okay, so I'm going to do negative 2 times. Always put your substitution in a parentheses when you're putting them in. Okay, so I could just put times, but that would be too confusing. I want you to always put, when you're substituting something in for a number, for a letter, sorry, put it in parentheses. Negative 2 times negative 2 cubed plus 4 times 3. All right, so first I'm looking at my parentheses. I see there aren't any operations inside of my parentheses, so I can skip my P. Then I'll go on to exponents. So I do have one exponent in this equation. That's 2 to the third power. So I'm going to do negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Okay, negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Then I need to bring everything down. Plus 4 times 3. And my negative 8 has to be multiplied by a negative 2. Okay, so now I get to go through and I get to do my multiplying from left to right. Negative 2 times negative 8 is a positive 16 because a negative times a negative equals a positive. Plus, I'm going to do 2 steps in one here because I know I have to do my multiplying from left to right. 4 times 3 is 12. So now all I have to do is add what is 16 plus 12, and I would get 18. Ooh, oh my goodness, 28. That was a close one. 28. So my answer for this one is 28. This is substitution. Again, remember, please write this down. Always, when you are substituting, put your variable in a parentheses. Okay, so just like this, I didn't just put negative 2 times 2 cubed. I put a parentheses around the number I'm putting in there. Make sure you always, always, always do this, please. All right, so I'm going to put the quiz here, and then you can keep watching if you're having a hard time on your homework. Thanks for watching. All right, let's start with number 1. Number 1 says write using exponents. 8 times 8 times 8 would be, we use our base, 8. And then how many are there? There are 3. Those, we better do one with some variables in it. You're not going to do number 1 either, though, because I think you're doing even. So let's do number 2. R times R times R times R times S times S. Okay, so this one, we use our first letter, R. We count how many are there. 1, 2, 3, 4. R to the 4th power times, but we don't need to write that times in there. We can just write our second base, which is S, squared. Because when we have letters that are next to each other, we know that we need to multiply them together. So this would be my answer for number 2. Okay, let's look at number 8, which says, oh, sorry, I was looking at 9. It says 4 cubed, or 4 to the 3rd power. So to simplify that, I need to do 4 times 4 times 4. I know 4 times 4 is 16, so I need to do what 16 times 4. It's 24. It's 64. Boom, there's my answer, 64. All right, let's look at number 14. Number 14 says 3 times the quantity of 4 plus 2 squared. And we need to simplify that. Okay, oops, I forgot my other parentheses. So that means we need to follow, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, starting off with parentheses. 4 plus 2. So I need to write 6. Keep my parentheses and the 3 on the outside. Okay, now my next step is exponents. So I need to do 6 times 6, which is 36 times 3. And 36 times 3, 18, 9, 10 is 108. Boom, there's our answer. All right, let's go. I'll do number 20 next. Number 20 says evaluate each expression. Negative 6m squared 4m equals 2. Okay, so I'm going to bring down my equation, but instead of an m, I'm going to put my 2 in parentheses. So I'm going to do negative 6 parentheses. Don't forget those parentheses, you guys. Please don't forget those parentheses. Parenthesis 2, and then I put my squared on the outside of that second parentheses. Okay, now I have to do exponents. 2 times 2 is 4 times negative 6. Okay, a negative. Oh, that's another thing. Pay so close attention to. These negatives, they will be the easiest thing for you to forget. I've already talked about this, and it's still happening on our tests and our quizzes. Do not forget to bring down those negative signs. You will be so mad at yourself if you get the right answer and that's the wrong sign. So just be so careful and nitpicky when you're doing these problems, because it's so easy to do one little mistake and you're off. Okay, so a negative times a positive is a negative. So my answer is going to be negative 6 times 4 is 24. So my answer is a negative 24. Okay, and I just realized this was not number 20. This was number 34. But you're going to do the same thing for number 20 and the same thing for 34. Evaluate, they both say evaluate. So they're not the same numbers, but they're the same steps. Okay, so I accidentally did 34, but you'll do the same thing. Instead of A for number 20, you'll plug in a 5. Okay, so that is all the help I'm going to give you on homework for right now. Again, if you need help, please get me on Edmodo, and I would be happy to help you. Come in a little early in the morning, stay after school a little bit. I am happy to help in any way that I can. Thank you for watching.